Is here for this launch. My role is to tell you about the heritage of the Interceptor and the Continental GT. And I'm going to start with this machine here, which is a 1960s Royal Enfield Interceptor. But the Interceptor wasn't Royal Enfield's first parallel twin. In fact, the company had been making parallel twins since 1948. The first parallel twin is often referred to today as the twin with no name. It was just called 500 Twin. But it was a very worthy machine. It wasn't fast, it wasn't a sporting bike, but it was a very smooth motorcycle. And what the company had done right from the beginning, they'd worked on developing a smooth power plant. Most parallel twin cylinder engines at that time were statically balanced. Royal Enfield went the extra mile and dynamically balanced the crankshafts, and that made a huge difference to the rider's experience. Now that 1948 500 twin evolved in 1953 into a 700cc parallel twin, the Meteor. In the quest for more power and ultimately more speed, 1956 it really got some grunt. 40 brake horsepower, 110 miles an hour. That was the Super Meteor. 1958, it went even further. The Constellation. 51 brake horsepower, 110 miles an hour. And it was from that Constellation that the first Interceptors evolved. Now those first bikes were actually shipped across to North America, where they were sold as out-and-out competition machines, as scramblers. And you can actually see this one here pulling a wheelie. Now they weren't 750 Interceptors. Those first ones were highly tuned 700cc versions. They were basically a Constellation that was stripped down, made into a scrambler guise, given some real punch, and sold to the North American market. Now motorcycling in the United States in the 1960s was really growing. After the Second World War, there were only about 200,000 people in the United States with a motorcycle license. But by 1960, there were more than 3 million. And the scene was no better served than in the state of California, with its great motorcycling roads and year-round good weather. But also, the cultural scene there was really good for motorcycling. So you've got the counterculture of San Francisco, you've got the hippies, the outlaw biker gangs that were just starting, and of course the surf scene too. And they loved this motorcycle, the Interceptor. So in 1962, the end of 1962, the first proper Interceptor, not a tuned Constellation, 736cc, were shipped to the United States. And very much like this one, this is actually an American export model. They were a lot leaner and meaner looking than the standard British version. So it had a slimmed down fuel tank, it had the rev counter, a separate headlight, and the gaiters on the front, and 51.5 brake horsepower. And they really sold superbly well to the States. In fact, by 1964, no Interceptors were being sold in the UK. They were all going to Canada, United States, and a few to Australia. Now, the Redditch Royal Enfield factory, where this was made, closed at the beginning of 1967. But that didn't stop Interceptor production, because the company had a second factory 100 miles away, underground, that it developed during the Second World War, a place that was safe from Luftwaffe bombing. And it was in that underground factory that Interceptor production continued, right through to this, the ultimate Interceptor, the Series 2. 55 brake horsepower, 115 miles an hour. And again, its market was almost exclusively North America. And production continued there until the middle of 1970. But that's not really the end of the Interceptor story in terms of these bikes, because they've attracted a huge cult following. Many people in the UK have bought old Interceptors from North America, shipped them back to the UK and restored them, and still ride them to this day because they're more than capable of travelling at highway speeds. And that's the story of this bike. It went to North America in 1965, and it came back to the UK in 2008, where it was restored to this beautiful condition. Now, the motorcycling scene in the United Kingdom in the 1960s